We'll drive something like that. But
Okay, sounds good. All right. So, welcome to the episode, guys. I'm doing something a little bit different than normal. Usually I stick to Virginia when I do my podcast episode. So this is not technically an episode of Meeting Virginia, but we've never met in person, unfortunately, but I have known of Nick maybe for about 2 or 3 years, maybe about 3 years now.
it's got to be getting pretty close to 2 years now.
Okay, yeah, it's been a while. But yeah, he pops in my feed from time to time when the algorithm allows him to, but he always gives great content when it comes to podcasting and branding. I'm signed up to his newsletter, and he sort of inspired me to kind of reach out to him and give my audience some good advice on podcasting. Personally, I think podcasting is probably one of the best things people can do nowadays, especially to kind of network, make content, gain some insights. It's a good opportunity in the modern day, 2022 and beyond, to connect with people digitally. We no longer have to meet people face to face and kind of have interactions like this. But before I ramble too long, I wanted to introduce you guys to Nick. Thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited to be here, and I'm glad the newsletter and my content has been inspiring you. Like that is the goal with it. And it's so awesome to hear that you say that it's kind of inspired you to take podcasting to that next level.
Yeah. It's funny, because we talked a little bit just now about this before the official recording of this podcast. But yeah, I had a podcast, kind of an in-person local podcast, Meeting Virginia. And initially it was for real estate, just kind of see what people's perspectives of real estate in the area was. And that kind of got boring fast. So then I moved to just kind of trying to meet people and hear their story. And then I started seeing your content, and you have a good mix of informative but also entertaining, which I have to.
I appreciate that.
Like, I watch it and I learn from it, but I'm also trying to like steal stuff. Like, oh man, maybe I can try to make content like that. That's really good. But yeah, so I saw your newsletter and I was thinking about it. I was like, you know what? Why limit myself to just podcasting in the local geographic area when I can do it? At the time, I was thinking Zoom and reach out to people like you and people from any state or anyone that has good information or, something insightful that people can learn from. So you're the first person that came to mind. So this is kind of episode 1 of me implementing that idea / strategy.
That's awesome. I'm honored.
But I did want to get into it and ask, I guess, for everyone watching and listening, what even made you start doing podcasts? Because I feel like it's kind of been around, but I feel like it's still in a weird way in its infancy. Like, I still meet people that don't know what podcasts are.
Yeah, that's what kind of blows my mind. Is it's still, as much as everyone says everyone's got a podcast or podcasts are everywhere, it's still kind of like a niche medium right now. It's growing very fast, but it is still new to a lot of people. So I agree. I think it is in its infancy. But to answer your question, like what got me into it, it was actually something I knew I had always wanted to do. Like I wanted podcasting to be a part of my kind of 9-5 to freedom brand. Mm-hmm. But I just kept kicking it down the road because I was like, I need to build an audience somewhere else. And then once I build that audience, then I can bring them over to a podcast where they're going to actually want to listen to me and it'll make the show worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And I actually I tried doing video and it was not good at all. Like I would plan everything out. I had it all like in my head, what I was going to say. It was outlined. I get everything set up and then I'd go to hit record and it was just like it was so bad. So I was playing around on social media. Like TikTok was like, everyone's like, you got to be on TikTok, So I just like started playing with it a little bit, just putting my face on camera. And I was like, okay, this isn't nearly as bad as I was thinking, but I'm still like doing like a full long form video is over my head. I can't do this right now. So I was like, podcasting would be a great way to do it because I can talk, I can have conversations with people and not feel like I have to fill 10, 20, 30 minutes of an episode or a video with just my own content of just me talking. Yeah. So being able to have that conversational kind of setting, I think, is what really attracted me to it after failing at video. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to see what happens. If no one listens, but I'm going to do it. And since then, I've just kind of fallen in love with it, and that's kind of been my thing ever since.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting way to get into it. But I definitely agree that the whole I don't know, doing solo videos is a tough skill. I feel like it's underestimated. Like just sitting there and
it 100% is.
Yeah, like coming up with like some of these guys that do like hour or 2 hour or 3 hour long videos by themselves on some topic. I don't know. One, I would just get bored. Like if it's too long form, I would just get bored, especially if it's like real estate. I don't do many real estate videos for that reason, just because it's like I can't talk about real estate for that long. It's
exhausting.
It's exhausting. And then you have the script, and it's just a whole process that's very time consuming. You might not get any views. But yeah, I definitely think like podcasting is such a good format because it's basically just a conversation that's on camera. If you have the, I guess, software like Riverside,
yeah,
Riverside or Zoom, or you can always put it in an audio format, and that works just as well.
And that was my plan too. Like when I launched the podcast, because I was like, I have the opportunity to take video content and use that. And I was like, I don't want to get to like episode 100 and then decide I'm going to start incorporating video and then be like, I could have had 100 episodes worth of video and I have none. Yeah. So I was like, from the get-go, I started recording video knowing that I was eventually going to start incorporating it. But still, with like a lot of the interviews I have a whole ton of video content that I still have yet to do anything with. But I agree, it's a different beast, video versus podcasting for sure.
Yeah. One thing, I'm curious to know your thoughts about this, because I saw, I think it was a Lewis Howe. He did a podcast. I don't remember who was the guest, but he was talking about adding value, and he was saying that a podcast is a good way, because you're kind of, in a way, you're brokering. If it's not a solo podcast, you can also broker value through guests. So I didn't know. I guess I want to know your take on that, because I know some people, they might say, "Oh, I want to start a podcast, but I don't know what to talk about," and which I'm in that same boat. It's like, besides real estate, which I don't want to talk about all day. It's like, whoa, what else do I talk about? And guess I feel like is a good middle ground to figure out.
That's actually, it's funny. I've never heard it put that way, but that is exactly what I did with my podcast. Like I started learning things in the business world before I launched the podcast. Like I had a blog and I was putting a lot of time and effort into that. I was learning SEO and social media marketing. I was learning all these things. So I had a basic knowledge of everything. I could navigate that world, but I was definitely not an expert. I wasn't someone like, oh, I have this knowledge that I should go start a podcast and start talking about. But what I was able to do is start bringing on guests that had that knowledge and had that expertise. And that allowed me to bring content that covered those topics. And by association, just me being able to bring the guests on, me having the conversations and being able to showcase their stories and their knowledge, in a way kind of put me in a similar bucket as them, just because I'm involved in the conversation. So that, I think, especially for anybody that's like, oh, I think it'd be really cool to start a podcast about X or Y, but I couldn't speak about it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. Or maybe I don't have the knowledge to do that, but I think it'd be really awesome. Bringing on guests would be a really slick way to still break out into that space, learn, because that was another thing too. I got to ask questions that I had to my guests. So I was basically getting like free hour-long master classes in every podcast that I did, because they're just giving away free information. And I was like, what do I want to ask this person next? Because where am I going with my business? So it can work selfishly like that, but then you're still providing massive value to anybody who wants to listen.
Yes. Yeah. I think the whole you learning too, I feel like is an underrated it's pretty underrated because sometimes if you get a certain type of guest on, like I remember in the past, I don't know if this happened yet, I may have missed this, but I remember, I think on your Twitter, you were trying to get Gary Vee on your show.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's happened yet. I hope it has, or I hope it's in the making. But even something like that, like if you were to get Gary Vee, you sit down, even if it's like a 30 or 45-minute podcast, the value you're giving to others is immense. But the value you're getting, because you're asking very specific questions, it's almost in a way a free mentorship, assuming he doesn't charge. I don't know if he charges to do podcasts. But
I don't think, yeah.
Yeah, assuming he does it, with out of the generosity of his own time. It's basically like a free mentorship for however long the podcast episode runs. So that's a pretty interesting way to think about it. I actually never really thought about it in that way. Like you're getting value yourself from just asking questions.
I've learned so much from the guests, and some of them, like, what I think is really cool about it, especially from like a guest podcast doing like an interview style type of thing, is you're able to build relationships with people. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's how we met. I think it was through Twitter we first interacted, and then I was like, "Oh, dude, you mind coming on the podcast?"
Yeah.
And we've been in contact for the most part ever since, with gaps of time in between, but like we're still in contact. We still talk quite a bit. Like we still have a relationship there. Mm. And that's something some of the guests I've gone on to, we talk almost every week. Mm. And that relationship just builds, and some are turning to like partnerships, and these opportunities just start coming to you when you're able to build relationships. And that's probably like one of the biggest things through all the guests that I've had on, like all of the entrepreneurs, business owners that I've spoken to, relationships are like the biggest contributor to their success.
Right.
Someone put them on the right path, or someone was able to connect them, or maybe that one relationship specifically led to a growth in the business, whatever it is. But relationships are key. And podcasting, going from a guy who virtually knows nothing to being able to speak to highly successful people. Like, I shouldn't be talking to these people. They're just willing to come on and start talking with me and essentially start building that relationship. Like that to me is so valuable. And I think people totally underestimate the power of podcasting in that regard.
Yeah. What you said about the whole relationship thing, I think is, that's another thing that I feel like is very it's I don't even want to call it underrated. It's almost like a weird, almost obvious secret in a way.
It's underutilized.
But I feel like so many people, like, I know I've read a lot of just like random business books and like real estate books and all kinds of just random stuff, courses. And one of the things that almost never really comes up, like people will say networking, but they always say it almost in the context of like go to some meeting or whatever and hand out a business card or, whatever. Meet somebody, say, oh, I have a business. Oh, you have a business? Oh, one day let's maybe work together. And then most likely you never see that person ever again because it wasn't a real relationship. But in a sense, like the podcast is almost giving value to each other. So it's a more, I guess, authentic relationship that it's almost like obvious, but it's not really. Like you don't really see that in any business books, or you rarely do you see people really talk about that. At least I don't.
It's not, and especially in a podcasting space. Like I've been preaching it through my Instagram. Like a lot of the videos that I post are about that specifically. And I actually had a guest. The episode hasn't gone live because I took a slight hiatus from my podcast actually. Mm-hmm. And we were having a very similar conversation, like all of these other benefits around podcasting that people are looking at, like the sponsorship money, like, oh, I can make a little bit of extra cash here, or I can maybe build an audience there. But it's like, there's so much more to podcasting that people just aren't looking at because they're so focused on how do I get a sponsor?
Yeah.
And the relationships being one of those big ones. I think the relationships themselves are huge, but even the guests or the podcasters that have guests on their show, they don't really utilize that. They have it like, they have the ability to build relationships like right in the palm of their hands, and they just let it go by either not continuing the conversation or not continuing to nurture that relationship. And it's like, do you realize how many people that you just basically shook hands with and then let walk by you when you could have had that conversation? It's like, how valuable would that be if you're bringing these people in and being able to develop something out of that, but instead you're being like, all right, man, it was good seeing you.
Yeah.
It's like you're walking and passing and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think about, do you, out of curiosity, what's a big objection people usually, another, I would say, big objection or something people give you when it comes to starting a podcast? Because I imagine there's people who probably want to start one, but then they talk themselves out of it, or for whatever reason, they don't see the value in it.
I think well, you just said it, they don't see the value in it. And I think because of that kind of mindset around podcasting is like, it has to be another avenue that brings in revenue, like direct revenue. It's like, if I'm going to put out a course and you're going to pay me for that course, that's direct revenue. If I'm going to put out a podcast, I want people to pay me in that sense. Sponsors pay me to do that podcast. So I think not understanding the value is a huge one.
Okay.
And then everyone hates their voice. I think that's probably the number one. Like, even everyone who's like ready to go, let's start a podcast, they're still like afraid to hit record. And that's understandable because I've lived it. I understand it. But then the final one is like not getting so caught up in like, is this going to be worth my time? Like, am I going to be able to get listeners? Am I just going to create this and no one's going to be listening and it's going to serve my business no purpose? And I think a lot of that one is just really figuring out what the goals are for the show and like, what do you want from this podcast? Is it sponsorship money? Is that all you're after? Is it the networking? Is it the audience? Like, what is the real goal of it? And that was something I didn't really have defined when I started mine. And after that kind of light bulb went on, I'm like, man, I'm meeting a lot of really cool people. It's like, I would keep doing the podcast. If no one ever listens again, I would keep doing the podcast just to be able to keep talking with cool people and having those conversations and building those relationships. So that kind of became my core goal with the show.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. You just kind of mentioned it, but a podcast, like a business, once money comes in, it effectively, because you mentioned you have to kind of have a goal and know exactly, I guess, why you're making the podcast and what the overall, this is not your words exactly, but basically the overall strategy. But yeah, do you think that, I'm trying to think of like some more hangups that people probably have. Because I imagine, like, do you have a strategy to help people figure out why they want to start a podcast or anything like that? Maybe a framework they can use to figure out, okay, is this the best bet for you? Do you want to make a podcast just to meet people, or do you want to make a podcast with the sole focus of maybe selling a course or getting sponsorships or whatever else? I'm not sure of any other possible ways to, I guess, monetize a podcast. Out of curiosity, I don't know if that question makes sense or doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think if someone's getting ready to start a podcast, there's already kind of that idea of like, at least at a high level of why I'm doing this. But I think, and I've heard it from so many different people, and I know that there's like a legitimate source for this, so I apologize for not knowing exactly who kind of coined this whole thing, but diving into like the whys, like, have you heard like the 7 whys?
Was that, I want to say that's Simon Sinek, but I'm not.
Is it? It could be. I know the shoot, now it's escaping me, like the actual name of it, but he's very big in understanding and defining the why. He may have actually like dove into it, but
Okay.
Essentially the whole concept of this is like, okay, why do you want to start a podcast? So that I can build an audience. Okay, why do you want to build an audience? So that I can sell more courses. Okay, why do you want to sell more courses? And you keep diving deeper into the why until you can't dive any deeper into it. That is the true why of it all. And once you can identify that and the true purpose of why you're starting a podcast, it's going to make a lot more sense of the direction you need to go with it.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's like anything. You want to figure out exactly why you're doing it and then get to the kind of root of exactly why you're doing it to kind of help figure out the best strategy to achieve what you want.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Running a podcast is very much like running a business. It's like starting a business. And you still have to promote, you still have to create the content, you still have to do everything that you would do when you're trying to scale a business. It's like another level of that funnel or that ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, for anyone, I guess that's maybe they already have a podcast established or they're just starting one, what tips would you recommend, I guess, to help them promote? Because I feel like starting the podcast is one thing, getting the traffic and getting the people to actually listen is a whole different ball game in itself.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it's like business. The creating the podcast, that's like 10-20% of the battle.
Yeah.
Marketing is like your other 80. And people don't. I wasn't for the longest time. Like I would basically create the episode. I'd do one social media post about it and
Hope that people.
yeah, someone's going to see that post, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't. So I think the biggest tip, and this happens and can start even before you launch a podcast, is building the one-on-one relationships. Like start having conversations with people. Social media makes it extremely easy, but this was something I had started doing with Instagram when I was taking it seriously, is I was having one-on-one conversations. I'd reach out to people cold and just start talking with them. And slowly these little relationships start to build. And then when you do share content, people are now engaged. They're like, oh, I remember him or I remember her. Like we were having a really good conversation. Like what is her post about or what is this post about? You start getting people invested in what you're creating versus just creating and saying, hey, everybody, look at what I did.
Right.
No one cares.
Yeah.
That's the sad reality. Is just no one's going to care unless you give them a reason to care. And the best way to do that is to first show that you care.
Yeah. That's kind of a like a how to win friends and influence people kind of strategy. Like show them that you care so that they care. That's not exactly what the strategy is, I think, but it's close to it. It's funny when you talked about when you would cold message people or kind of already established the relationship ahead of time. I don't know if you've heard of have you heard of Jordan Harbinger at all?
The name sounds super familiar, but I'm not sure.
He was one of, I'm going to say he's one of the OG podcasters really back before anyone knew what podcasting was. Like
that's probably why I know the name.
Yeah.
Harbinger sounds super freaking familiar to me.
Yeah, he was around for a while. I know. So a little bit of a background to why I know him. Back in college, I struggled dating, and he had a podcast called The Art of Charm. So that I listened to it back in the day. This is before they didn't even call it podcasting back then. It was just audio,
just recording stuff
online. Yeah, it was just audio on like a blog. But the reason why I brought him up is because he has a saying, dig the well before you're thirsty. And at one point, he had a falling out with the company Art of Charm. And I guess him and his business partners got into a fight. And then he ended up starting his own thing, which is now the Jordan Harbinger Show. But if I recall correctly, one of the things that he said saved him and basically kept him from being like broke on the streets is he had built up such a good relationship with all the previous podcast guests that when he decided to do his own thing, he kind of sent them all emails, said, hey, had a falling out with my business partners. I'm starting my own show. It's going to launch in like February of, I think he launched in like 2019. Pretty recently this all happened. And I think I'm almost certain in like 3 months, his subscribers, and I guess is for podcasting. I think that is still subscribers.
I don't know anymore. I can't keep up with it. I think it's follow. I think they changed it to followers now.
To followers, yeah, but followers, subscribers. But I'm pretty sure he surpassed in like a few months Art of Charm.
Dang.
Their subscribers. So it's just interesting how powerful relationships can be. Because Art of Charm he had been with for I think 4 or 5 years, and then when he started his own brand, he surpassed him in all of like 2 or 3 months. So
well, and you have to figure like because being a podcast host, like you are essentially the one building the relationships with the listeners on the other end. They're tuning in to listen to you. So when he had to leave and he started his own show, everyone that was listening to the Art of Charm was like, well, why am I listening to this Art of Charm now? I want to go listen to the Jordan Harbinger show.
It's funny because that's exactly, I remember like I would listen to it like I think they did an episode every week or every other week. And I remember for like 2 months, there were no episodes. And I was like, wait, where'd the episodes go? What's going on?
What's happening?
And then I remember he sent out like an email to like everyone if you were subscribed. It was like, oh yeah, I'm starting my own show in like February. And I was like, oh, because he was the like, there were other people in the company, but he was the host. So he was the voice of the show. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, he's starting his own thing. Well, I'm jumping ship to the new thing that he's doing. And to be honest, ever since then, I know that they still exist, the Art of Charm. I don't know how well they're doing. I don't see them at all. I see him. I don't see them. So I guess.
Yeah. And that is the power of podcasting. And that is the power of building those relationships. And I remember, I think it was episode like 61 of my show. I interviewed Alex Sanfilippo, who is the founder of Podmatch. Which,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's like essentially a podcast host and guest dating service. Essentially, like you can go there as a podcaster and find guests. They can go there, find hosts. And he was talking about like growing that business and what it took to get there. And he said a lot of it was one-on-one interactions with people. He said doing things that don't scale is so underrated. Everyone's worried about how do I reach 1,000 people at a time? How do I attract massive amounts of attention all at once? And blogs, YouTube videos, like everything that you consume is like, here's the hack to 1,000 this, 20,000 that, 1,000,000 this. And it's like, ooh, I'm going to tune in because I want that. But most of that stuff doesn't work. It's usually like winning the lottery, like something just happens to hit and it works. But nothing can take away the one-on-one relationships that you're building with people. You're going to start building, it's going to be slow, but you're going to be building a community of people who care, people who want to tune in, people that want to engage and be a part of this because that relationship is there. It's not just me talking to someone who happened to see my content and I have no idea who they are. Now I actually know who I'm speaking to directly, and they know that I'm speaking directly to them. Like it took me a while to figure that out. Like I was chasing the strategies and the tips just like everyone else. Yeah, but
me included.
I would
that too.
I would say over the past year that's kind of been the mindset shift is like the one-on-one conversations actually works. You can run strategies and tips all day long until you're black and blue in the face and it never seems to work. But the relationship building seems to always work.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, that's the relationship building is so underestimated and underutilized. Yeah, it's interesting that you said there's not really any kind of like hack or anything like that. I know. Have you heard of Alex Hormozy at all?
Yeah.
He said something very similar where it was just kind of I think someone was kind of asking him, how do I scale to like 300 something YouTube subscribers or Instagram, whatever. And he was saying that the people that he sees that get that high follower count, it's just posting consistency, like just one thing at a time every single day. And he's like, there's no real hack or anything like that made it blow up. Eventually something just takes off and then it kind of goes from there. So yeah, it sounds like it's very similar. You kind of have to meet one person at a time, stay consistent with it, stay diligent with it, and just kind of let it come to fruition over time is what it sounds like.
Yeah. And I don't know, for anyone that's listening, like that sounds like depressing. That sounds like, because you're probably listening to this and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna figure it out. Like I'm gonna find the hack that's gonna get them. I'm gonna find the right hashtag, or I'm gonna find the right trending sound on Reels or TikTok, and that's what's gonna do it. And I mean, you could be chasing that for a long freaking time when you can have a conversation with someone right now. It's going to take you 2 minutes to start that conversation, and that's going to be one more person in your corner. But instead, you're too busy scrolling to find the right sound or the right hashtag.
You know what, Nick? I'm upset you said that. I was looking when I went to interview you. I was looking for the hack to find that perfect audio that was going to launch me to 1 million followers.
I'm sorry. There's no secrets here.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that's just a good lesson in life. I think in general, just staying consistent, having a bit of patience, letting things kind of work out. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to ask about branding. And the reason why I ask it, kind of thinking about Gary Vee again, earlier in the year, I was thinking that branding is probably one of the most powerful marketing tools out there. And the reason why I thought about this is because Gary, I don't know if he came out this year or last year, maybe. He came out with this thing called Empathy Wines. And
Oh, yeah.
I remember he came out with it, and I remember I almost bought it. I literally, he had a link. I went to the link. I literally put it in my cart. And I sat there and thought to myself, because I try to think about why I buy things. And I was like, why did I want to buy this wine? Because I don't drink wine. And I was like, you know what it is? I like Gary Vee. I was just willing to try his wine just because I like him. And I'm sure it's good wine. It wasn't super expensive. I knew if I bought it, I wasn't going to drink it, so I'd have probably just gifted it. I would have probably drank a little bit just to see how good it is.
Say I did it.
Yeah, but it would have been I would have probably bought 2 and given 1 as a gift, or bought 3 and given 2 as a gift. I probably still will, but it's just probably sitting in my cart on his website somewhere. But yeah, so I thought about it. I was like, yeah, his brand is so strong. I'm sure, at least for me, he could sell almost anything. And I'd probably be on board to at least check it out, if not buy it like the wine. But I'm just curious to know your overall thoughts on brand, because I feel like podcasting in itself is probably a solid tool, if not one of the best tools, in my opinion, to help people build a brand if they don't already have a brand.
I think that is very much the case. I completely agree with that. Even if you are building from scratch, you're just now starting day one, I think it's still a worthwhile avenue. Just from what we were talking about before, being able to start a podcast and start bringing people on and having conversations and networking and building those relationships. In a personal brand, that's what you're getting people to kind of buy into you as a person. And that's why Gary Vee with his wine, you've bought into Gary Vee and his message and what he has to say. And if he creates something, you're thinking oh, hell, that's super cool. I want to check that out. But it's because you bought into him. Yeah. And vice versa. There's a lot of people that can't stand the guy and are like, Empathy Wine, he's just trying to milk all of his freaking followers and subscribers for every dollar he can. And it's just a matter of you bringing people into your space. And I think podcasting, it's very much like video, only you lose the visual element of it. But I think it can be just as powerful, if not more powerful than video, just because you can listen to a podcast at any time. Right. You can go on and you can hear your favorite podcast host's voice basically talking to you for 20 minutes to an hour, and you don't have to be fully engaged in it. You can be out doing other things while you're consuming that content. Whereas video, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, if I'm going to watch a video, I usually I have to stop everything else that I'm doing and pay attention to the video. I'm not usually just letting a video play in the background while I'm doing other things.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, most of what I listen to nowadays is it's basically all podcasts anyway. So, I mean, I know some people, if I don't have the podcast on Spotify, or I should say, if they haven't uploaded the episode on Spotify, some people I listen to upload it first on YouTube.
Oh, right.
But more or less, it's the same thing. I just have it in the background. I'm working. It's just playing. So I'm not really watching the video. I'm just listening. But yeah, I completely agree, though. You can listen to it while you're driving, while you're walking, doing some other stuff. I know if I do cardio at the gym, if I know a good podcast episode's coming out with a guest, that's probably one of the few things that gets me through cardio because I hate cardio. So,
I'm with you.
so yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
And I mean, there's really, you don't have to do a lot. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Like, it's not like if you want a really high quality video, you need this expensive camera and you need lights and you need all this other stuff. Like, the apps nowadays, like Anchor is a prime example. Like, you could literally start a podcast with just your phone, and that is it. Record the audio on your phone, upload the audio on your phone. You never have to even look at a computer if you don't want to. And like, the barrier to entry is so easy, but so many people give up so quick. And I think that's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, is the goals of it. They're thinking, oh, someone's going to find our conversation funny, or someone told me I should start a podcast, but I don't really know what I want to do or why I'm doing it. And the number of people that don't make it past episode 7 even is like alarmingly high. And then anybody who makes it to episode 20 is like already in the top, I don't know, like 5 or 10% of all active podcasters, just because they all quit before that.
Wow.
So it seems like everyone's got a podcast. There's, at this point, I don't know, 3 million, 4 million. But of the number of active people contributing podcast episodes every week, it's like within the last 90 days, it's probably 300,000 or 400,000 worldwide.
Wow, worldwide.
That's young. Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
Like, think of how much content gets uploaded to YouTube every day or to Instagram. And we're like fighting for attention against like billions of other pieces of content. And with podcasting, you're competing against, I mean, if you start breaking it down into like niches, you're competing against a very small amount of people to get attention.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very good point. I did not know that. Yeah. I feel a lot better actually because for Meeting Virginia, I'm on episode like 28. And I was sitting there like, oh man, I need to like catch up and get those numbers up. Because the goal for that was to get to 100 episodes and then from that point figure out, is it worth continuing or kind of see where it's at. But after this talk, I'm more motivated to keep doing it for the relationships, but I'm also happy that I made it to episode 28 because I feel like I've accomplished something. I did not know that many people dropped off. I didn't realize that many people like worldwide even stay that consistent. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it kind of blew my mind. I know the stats had shifted from when I had last looked them up. Like, there's plenty more podcasts. I looked it up kind of at the beginning of the year, and at that time there was like maybe 200,000 podcasts that had published in the last 90 days, probably like January of this year, which is not a lot. Like, there might be 2 million podcasts or 4 million podcasts out there, but people who are consistently producing content in podcast fashion are not that many.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I want to bring up too, because I know someone listening to this is probably thinking, oh, 200, 300,000 still sounds like a lot. I forget who it was. Someone I'm also subscribed to in their newsletter. They were talking about if you have a brand or like a niche, how much opportunity there is per niche. Because they're saying like, if you think about it, there's X million people in just the US alone. If you move out to the whole world, there's like 8 billion people, or however many people, but like out of those 8 billion, a few billion probably have access to the internet. And he was kind of, long story short, he was saying, if you think your market's oversaturated, understand that in just America alone, you don't know that many people that have like 1 million followers. And if they do, there's no reason to assume that their followers can't also still be your followers and can't also still be interested in whatever you have to talk about or whatever whatever your thing is. Two people can be, one person can be following multiple people. So there's plenty of people out there. Like he said that someone out there was like a millionaire about, and it doesn't always have to be about the money, but it stunned me because it was such a niche. It was like a very, very, very niche it wasn't even like it was just a weird practice. Like some people say like, oh, you can't make money from underwater basket weaving. It was like underwater basket weaving. It was so specific. And it's one of those things you hear and it's like, who would buy this or who even would listen to this? And the guy had like 1 million something followers. So I was like, there's an audience somewhere, even for this very specific thing. So,
and I mean, I don't know about you. I know, like having listening to a lot of podcasts, like I listen to more than one business podcast.
Yeah.
I listen to more than one true crime podcast, more than one comedy podcast. Like I don't just pick one podcast and that's all I listen to.
Yeah.
So I always I kind of laugh a little bit when people like talk about competition and like, well, I can't do that because they're doing that and like so on. I've interviewed so many people that do what I do. I've been on podcasts with so many people that do what I do. Like, it's only competition if you make it competition. Yeah. There's room for collaboration. And what is the rising tides? Something.
I know of the expression. I don't. I can't remember the exact expression.
Oh, I can't believe I forgot that. Like rising tides raise all ships or something like that.
Mm. That sounds right, yeah.
If you're collaborating with other people in your space, like everyone's rising up. Like everyone's benefiting from it. So I don't agree in competition in that sense. I think there is such thing as competition. We all want a little bit of piece of it, but there's plenty of the pie to go around. Like we can all get a piece of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's almost like I'm in real estate and people say like, oh, it's too saturated. There's too many real estate agents. One could argue, and there's a lot of real estate agents, of course, sure, but there's also a lot of houses that can be sold. Like if you think about a county, or not even a county, you think about just a subdivision. It's probably like 300 or 400 houses in a single subdivision. Then you expand out to like the county and then the city, So it's the same thing, I think, with podcasting or any industry or brand or whatever. I do want to ask, I guess kind of the final question, for anyone listening that wants to get started. I know you mentioned Anchor earlier. I guess what would be if you have like maybe a step-by-step, 1, 2, 3, top 3 things they should do. Like if this person's listening, they're inspired, they want to go today and get their podcast off the ground. I guess what would be your top 1 to 3 steps to get them from point A to point B or point C, we can call it?
I would say, 1, figure out why you want to do it. Because if you don't figure that out, you're going to end up like majority of podcasters and you're going to end up quitting before episode 7 and you're going to be like, why am I even doing this? This is a waste of time. Number 2, once you've figured out why, and you nail down kind of what you want that podcast to be about, start recording. Don't think about it too much. I put off launching the podcast for so long because I thought I needed this and I thought it needed to be why. Like I got it way inside my own head. Once you launch, you're going to start figuring it out. You're going to be able to make tweaks. One thing that I struggled with at the beginning was I was comparing myself to the people that like inspired me to podcast. Like I was listening to people like Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas and all these other business podcasters. And I was like, man, I just recorded this podcast episode. This sounds nothing like a Pat Flynn podcast. This sounds nothing like a John Lee Dumas podcast. Like I can't put this out. Like I'm going to get laughed right out of here. No one's expecting you, especially on episode 1, to be at that kind of caliber.
Right.
To produce at the same caliber that teams of people are working together to produce. And it took a while for me to kind of get over that. So I think don't think about it too much. Learn what you need to learn and just get started and figure it out as you go, because you're going to make adjustments. No matter how much you think you know, you're not going to know it all and you're going to still need to make adjustments. So you might as well get started now and start making adjustments now, because it's just going to get you to where you want to be faster. And then my last piece of advice would be to promote it, market it, actually think strategically about the promotion and the marketing, because that's what people aren't doing. Build those relationships, have the one-on-one conversations with people. Even if you're saying, I'm going to launch a podcast next month, start having the conversations now. You don't have to wait until you have a podcast to start building those connections, because by the time you get ready to launch and you're saying, hey guys, I have a podcast out, you're going to have a whole bunch of people saying, awesome, I want to listen. Send it to me.
Yeah. Those are solid. Those are some solid tips right there.
Thanks, man.
So just to make sure if I'm recapping correctly, step 1, have a goal, have the why, kind of what we mentioned earlier. Step 2, just do it. And step 3, kind of alert people to it ahead of time and then kind of market it, basically. No need, whoever's listening, they don't have to actually start the podcast first, then try to get the audience. They can try to get the audience before they even launch the podcast.
And just to kind of add a little caveat to that, when you're marketing, when you're doing these engagements, it's not doing the engagements to say, hey man, I'm starting a podcast, and like, you're not promoting, you're not self-promoting at this point. You're literally, say it's on Instagram, because I've been spending a lot of time there. You shoot them a message and say, hey, I just saw this post about whatever, and I thought it was really awesome. Like, this really resonated with me. I just wanted to let you know I thought that was really awesome. I gave you a follow. I'm really looking forward to the other content that you're putting out. Start the conversation. It's literally a conversation. Don't go into it trying to get anything out of it. Don't go anything trying to push anything onto people. Just start the conversation, and they're naturally going to want to understand more of what you're doing. And if anything, if you do have a podcast or you're getting ready to launch it, they might be, oh, so what are you up to? Oh, well, I actually just launched a podcast like last week. Like I just launched this thing. I'm super excited about it. And they're gonna be like, oh, that's awesome. Like, send it over. Let me take a listen. Like, going into it, just having the conversations is going to get people interested and eager. And that alone is what can really help set that podcast off in the right direction right out of the gate. But then don't forget to keep doing it. If it's working, keep doing it.
Right. Yeah. All right. These were some solid tips. So anyone listening, they have no excuse not to start a podcast after this episode.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Nick. For anyone listening and watching, where is the best place for them to find you?
So I'm on Instagram, but if you go to 95podcast.com, that has my podcast that actually will take you directly to my main brand. And I have social media links. I have blog posts, videos. I have all kinds of stuff over there. So if you just go to 95podcast.com, that'll pretty much direct you everywhere you need to go.
Okay. All right. Sounds great then. Sounds great. All right, guys, go follow Nick. Go listen to his content. Go start a podcast immediately. But yep, I appreciate you being on the show, man. It was a great episode. I think people got a lot. They will get a lot out of this.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. It's a blast always, and it was great catching up with you, man. It's been too long, and we're not that far away, so we have to meet up in person.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we're very close, very close. So yeah,
we're too close to not have met in person yet.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. Let's definitely stay in touch and meet up sooner than later.
Awesome, man.
All right. That's been another episode, guys. Another pseudo episode of Meeting Virginia. Hope you guys enjoyed the content. Be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share some love with Nick on his pages. Peace out, guys.